Hello and welcome to Open Mind UFO Radio. I'm your host Alejandro Rojas, and I have with me Martin Mover and Shaker Willis.
That's right, and it wasn't that long ago you called me that.
Isn't it?
Same reason you're calling me it now. I'm moving again.
Oh, you're moving, but not only that, you're also just busy doing a lot of stuff. I mean, people know about your podcast UFO, and of course, your audience knows you do the online video interviews and this and that. But you also, in your normal life, do all of these different things. So you just keep yourself pretty busy, don't you?
Yeah, there's no laurels that I'm resting on. I'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I like what I do, so I have fun.
What has also been fun is, as usual, there's always cool, I think, UFO stuff going on. And this has been a little more controversial than I expected it, and I don't know how you feel about that as well, but this new show about Dr. J. Allen Hynek and Project Blue Book. It's called Project Blue Book. So we have the writer and creator of the show, David O'Leary, on today as our guest. And this is what's really cool is that, if you look at his IMDb, it's mostly Project Blue Book. So this is kind of his first real big thing. And we talk about this is, what got him interested and how did he sell it? And he sold it to the big time. I mean, he's on History and they're spending tons of money marketing and they're doing so many cool things marketing it. So I'm so excited for this interview.
Plus, I mean, what a great interview that's going to be. Plus, he's the History Channel or whoever's actually producing this, the series. They're just doing top-notch, special effects, great acting. From what I can see so far, the people playing the part are really, really good. I'm really excited. I can't wait to watch it. January 8th.
Yes, January 8th it comes out. And unfortunately, I guess you weren't able to make it to one of the previews.
No, never saw the preview, which I really wanted to, but no.
Yeah, because
Chicago I was invited there. That's closest one near me, I think.
Yeah, that would have been cool, too, because Paul Hynek was there, J. Allen Hynek's son, who I interviewed, actually, already, and who will be next week's podcast.
Wow.
So that's a really fun one. But David O'Leary, you got to talk to him also, right?
I did. Yeah, he's a really nice guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really cool. Extremely just excited about the topic of UFOs and everything.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So a lot of fun. What I didn't realize is all of these guys were at both Alien Con, so Pasadena and Baltimore. I knew some of them were in Baltimore. That's where I met Paul Hynek, but I guess David O'Leary was at both as well. So a lot of fun. So at least the LA one will be able to meet up. But I have a feeling that, we're going to be able to interview him periodically for a while here because he's just a really... he loves talking about this stuff.
Right. No, he does. He was very excited to talk about it. And, I think when someone's passionate about something, it really goes a long way. And obviously that's why it has become a success enough for someone like the History Channel to pick it up. This guy, all the way through, he's just doing a top-notch job.
Mm-hmm. And, we talk about a lot of different topics, but one of those being that many of us, and I'm sure you felt the same way over the years, have felt, Blue Book is a perfect opportunity for a great television show because there were so many hundreds of unknowns.
Mm-hmm. Great cases.
Mm-hmm. So that's exciting. And then, so it's exciting for people to get to know about it. Now, we also do talk about some of the controversy, especially in the UFO arena, around some purists, I guess I will call them, because I think that's accurate, are a little upset that, no, some are very upset that they're not sticking completely to all of the facts. What is your perspective on that?
No, I don't know. And I guess I would like to see a show and before I judge it, but I know, you and I have talked about this before. You have to add spice to about anything to get it, to get it exciting enough to, hold the attention of an audience. So, I'm sure they're going to, embellish. It's just, everything is embellished when it comes to either, TV shows or movies. It's just what you have to do, really.
Yeah. And I think that, because it's hard to encapsulate, a historical moment or story in the short amount of time that you have,
right,
in a script or a television show. So you really have to take the facts that you want to get out there and figure out how to portray them in your story. And so you've got to kind of tweak some things. But what's exciting about this is that History Channel has done such a great job writing regular articles about all of these cases that cover the real facts. So they're not really hiding that, that things in the story are fictionalized. They're encouraging people to go look at all of the details in the real life situations. So that's what's exciting, because I'm hoping, and I'm sure it will help inspire, a whole new generation of people to really look at these cases and figure out who Dr. J. Allen Hynek was, because I think I always try to insert him in my talks that I do out there, because I don't want people to forget. I think he's one of the most important, if not the most important person, really, in civilian research of this topic.
One of the things I was thinking, do they actually say at the beginning of the show these are based on, real files, and that the Air Force did have this investigation team? I mean, do they actually say that at the beginning?
Oh, yeah.
Because I think it's very important, and going along with what you just said, because that would certainly inspire a whole new group of people if they knew that the government, 99% of the people out there, I'm sure, have no idea that the government actually did have this, and other projects in place,
right,
to study UFOs sightings.
Yes.
So I think that will be inspiring and will make a lot of people start to look into it a little.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and they do mention that on the show at the beginning. They have a graphic, then they make a big deal out of it, essentially, which is good.
That is good. Great.
So we'll be talking to Mr. O'Leary in just a minute, and I think you guys are going to love this, because he's just a ton of fun. The energy that he brings, the excitement for this topic. I think he's really having a fun time talking with other people interested in the topic, because we had a fun interview. But let's talk some UFO news. What you got for us?
Well, a little while ago, NASA had actually published something on more or less a document saying that it's possible that aliens may have been visiting Earth. And it was by Silvano Colombano, a researcher at NASA's Ames Research Center in Mountain View, California. Same town as SETI, where Dr. Shostak is. Anyway, so this article is by Live Science, and here's the truth behind NASA's document on aliens visiting the Earth. Fox News published a startling article Monday, December 3rd, with the headline, "NASA scientists say Earth may have been visited by aliens." Unsurprisingly, that news rocketed around the web, with similar articles soon turning up in the New York Post, Russia Today, the Daily Wire, but Fox appears to be the first news source that actually wrote about it. So these articles were based on a document, as I said, by Silvano Colombano, and they kind of stretched it a little bit and that's what kind of made it go viral. So it's not accurately represented. This is by Silvano himself. He writes this. It's not accurately represented. My perspective was simply that reports of unidentified aerial phenomena should be the object of serious study, even if the chance of identification of some of alien technology is very small. I think that's a major thing, actually, for someone from a NASA research center to say publicly.
I agree.
But they kind of, Fox kind of stretched it a little bit, and and I understand it's clickbait, but it went viral. I think it's very interesting, and I think it's a real huge step in the science world, actually, in the right direction of looking seriously at this topic.
Yeah, from what I understand too, this misrepresentation of what he said has been very negative for him.
That's too bad.
Yeah, there's been a lot of feedback, that that has hurt his career and some relationships, because he's making a very, and this is what's great. This article that you're referring to is on the front page of openminds.tv. It's the first one. And then the second article is NASA scientists, or it's one from NBC Mock. But this one is written by Seth Shostak from the SETI Institute. And he's saying that actually, this presentation was done at our event months ago. And here's what he's arguing, and he pretty much agrees. We talk about Shostak a lot, but he pretty much agrees that, that he has a good argument. He's saying that essentially he debated the idea, he's essentially saying that, SETI makes the argument, such a strong argument, that aliens are out there. There's got to be advanced civilizations, intelligent extraterrestrial civilizations, which is what their organization is all about looking for. So if they're out there, we ought to be paying attention to the potential that they have visited our planet in the very distant past, or it's possible that they could be visiting now. Shostak said he kind of takes issue with the idea of, physical beings, or at least something similar to us, but that Colombano says, well, what about artificial intelligence or robots, essentially, something that wouldn't be affected by the same physiological, problems with some of the extreme things you would go through in space travel.
Including time. That's what they mostly focus on, the amount of time.
Right.
Which I actually argued with Shostak about, and just the fact that I said maybe they figured something out in physics that we don't know, and can travel much faster. And he didn't think so.
Well, and which we don't know. That's such a major assumption on his part. However, he does concede that is entirely possible. That he has a point there. Which makes it then, something we should pay attention to. So, all the indicators, scientifically and otherwise, are that we should pay attention to this potential. And, you're right. Without the sensationalizing of his report, the report itself makes a great argument as to why, UFOs should be a serious topic. And so it's unfortunate the message kind of got muddled and lost, but it is an important message. So I agree. I think that's such a great. I think that showing that Seth Shostak is open up to the ideas in what he was saying is also, I think, a big deal too, because it shows that it's the sort of science grounded kind of argument that needs to be made. This is the way that you convince, scientists and mainstream to take a more credible look at this topic, is by these kind of serious science-based arguments, as opposed to, well, look at the internet. The internet's full of evidence that aliens are here. That's not really a very substantial argument. And it's one, unfortunately, some UFO researchers make.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing, though, just for the fact that it used to be that it was just totally ridiculous to even think about. And I think it's Stan Friedman. I think it's him that says, by proclamation of saying, "I would know about it." I'm a PhD and astrophysicist. I would know about it if they were visiting here, and that's kind of the attitude where science or a lot of people in that field have felt. But I do see a little bit of a turn. And,
I think so too. I think a lot of the discoveries we're making in space have really changed that conversation, where now scientists realize that, the physical world, especially in space, is much more different than we can even imagine or predict.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I just wanted to say below that article in Live Science, again, that's linked to OpenMinds.tv, top story up there now. There are also 7 things most often mistaken for UFOs. So that's a great thing to look through. And of course, one's a failed missile launch, which are spectacular looking. Mm-hmm. And lightning, I would have never guessed that, but ball lightning, I suppose. And
the sprites, I think, can often.
Oh yes, those are upside down lightning strikes.
Yeah,
that go up into the atmosphere. Bizarre. Mm-hmm. All good stuff.
Along these lines is something else I wanted to mention. Just this weekend, George Knapp had posted an article with an interview with Luis Elizondo, the guy who ran the Pentagon UFO project recently. And he talked about what's coming up in the future. They posted, so George wrote an article on Las Vegas Now, Channel 8 News out there in Las Vegas that he writes for. But they also posted a YouTube video about 6.5 minutes of Elizondo talking more thoroughly on this topic, and I want to read what he wrote because I think this is really important to give people an idea of what's going on with Elizondo and TTSA, what they're up to, and why, even though people are so frustrated they want to have so much information, why we don't know what they're up to and how this is all unfurling. So we'll talk more about this, but let me read what Elizondo said. He says, George Knapp essentially asked, is there something big going to come in 2019? Is there more information we're going to hear? And Elizondo say, when you say something big is coming, that could mean a bunch of things. From my perspective, my goal has always been being able to get the right information to the right people in the right places. That's really what it's about for me, and informing those individuals so decisions can be made so we can really take a look at this issue from a holistic, collective perspective, and then have that information get to a point where the government is doing its job and informing the people. It shouldn't be the world according to Luis Elizondo. It shouldn't be Lou informing everybody. It should be those in the positions that have the authority to inform the American people. And my job is to facilitate that process. But I think in the course of doing that, we have made significant progress in key areas. I think we have a much better understanding in the depth and scope that the Department of Defense has played in recent times, not historical 40s and 50s. I'm talking about very recent regarding the UFO phenomena. I think people will be surprised just how frequent and the volume in which these things are apparently recorded and observed by active duty military people on missions around the world, by the way. There is also some very interesting congruencies, some interesting relationships that are coming into light for the very first time. New information that I think if people found out would be very surprised. I think some people might be a little apprehensive, scratch their head and think, what does this mean for the rest of us? Other people might say, aha, I told you so. So it depends on who the audience is that'll be listening, but there's something for everyone.
Wow.
And I think that's really important because it demonstrates that that Lou is doing the job that he used to do. I mean, his career was, much of his career, besides being in the military, was intelligence. mostly around terrorism, but also around UFO. So it's about information gathering, getting that information to the right people so they can do the right thing. And of course, he and they are an advocate for getting information out. But it's a slow process. And like he says, and you get the sense when you talk to him personally, and I think more so in the original interviews, everybody's saying, Lou, give us information, give us info. And he's always had this pushback that I'm not the right person. I'm just a cog. I'm just someone who collected information, that hasn't been my job to inform the public. My job has been to inform the leadership who then take it and make the decisions. And so, as we've talked about, and we've seen little bits and pieces of, they have been informing leadership, in the sense of government leadership, I think military leadership, and they feel that they are moving things in the right direction. Now, George also asked, well, what about physical? You're looking at these materials. Is there something there? He said, this is Lou, there are a lot of things out there we are looking into to include tangibles in a real sense that will hopefully allow us to have a more comprehensive conversation. I don't want to lead the cart before the horse. There's a lot of analysis, which is good to hear him say that. There is a lot of homework that has to be done, and the most responsible thing I can do right now is say one thing one way, or irresponsible thing I can do is say one thing one way, and it turns out to be something else. So we remain cautiously optimistic, and we're going to leave no stone unturned. And so far, we've turned over many stones, and we have more to turn over. But finally, from my perspective, it's a huge accomplishment. At the same time, you have to respect the... he said they've also reached out to, a lot of people, like he said earlier. And he said from his perspective, that's a big accomplishment. At the same, you have to respect these individuals' privacy, and we have to respect their professional positions and allow them to collect as much data as they can before they really do anything with it. Keep in mind, there's a lot of data out there, and it would almost be a derelict of duty for anybody to make a decision preemptively without having all the necessary data in front of them. So, he was kind of saying that they've made progress with the leadership, the people on the inside they've been working with, that they've changed their minds, but it's a slow process because they have to get them the information. These people have to digest this information and understand it before then the final step of doing something with it, which, as he says, is to inform the American people. So some people may be skeptical because they don't have much faith in the government, but he obviously is that's where he's worked. He's a public servant, and his serious job is to help our government and our country to move forward in the best way possible. So I think it's really interesting that he is alluding to, and many people have assumed this to mean that there will be some sort of government acknowledgement, or at least perhaps even some sort of formal investigation or sharing more information about what AATIP, the current organization, is doing.
Yeah, coming out in 2019. All exciting stuff. And I know we're just about out of time here, but I also think it's very interesting that there seems to be a lot of connections between UFOs and military.
Yeah.
So many military sightings. When I have that subject come up, I have people, call in sometimes on my live show and talk about that.
Yeah.
They were in the military and had a sighting. Lots of them.
Well, Lou feels that's what they're doing. That he has at least said before that it's one of the things he thinks may be going on is that they're observing our military and defense capabilities, and that would make sense. It's along the lines of Robert Hastings and his research into the nuclear
exactly
aspect of all of this. So, yep, we are out of time, but certainly Project Blue Book had a lot of military cases. That was a majority of their cases, really, that were the best ones. But thank you once again for joining us, Mr. Martin.
You're very welcome, sir.
We'll be talking to David O'Leary, the writer and creator of the new History Channel series Project Blue Book, after this short break. happy to welcome to the show David O'Leary. Hello, how are you?
Hi, how's it going? How are you?
I am doing great. I'm very excited to be talking to you. And of course, my listeners know I've been very excited for Project Blue Book. And the idea for the show was yours.
It was. Yeah, listen, I've had a lifelong fascination with this subject matter. As for as long as I can remember, I left, I've told people this before, but it's like, I remember seeing E.T. in theaters and leaving Reese's Pieces on my windowsill in my Manhattan apartment that I grew up in. I actually went and saw the theatrical adaptation of Whitley Strieber's best-selling book Communion, starring Christopher Walken, in theaters in 1989 when I was I was only 9 years old, and I dragged my father to this movie that scared the hell out of me. But it's been a lifelong fascination for me. Just the question of are we alone in the universe? And I don't think that you can, I think that UFOs are a huge part of that question. And so for me, it really was for me, it started off as a sort of I was very interested in the UFO phenomena that was happening, now. And by now, I mean then, in like the 80s and 90s as I was growing up. But as I got into my 20s, I realized, gosh, America's history with this subject matter is just as fascinating, if not more fascinating, than what's happening right now. And that's when I really started the deep dive of just going back and looking at Project Blue Book and looking at the beginnings of like sort of the modern era of ufology. And that sort of became the impetus for like, wow, there is such an amazing story here. Not only in the fact that the U.S. Air Force launched an official investigation into this matter, but of course, the fact that the chief scientific advisor of Project Blue Book, who started off as a UFO skeptic, really changed his tune as the program went on, and certainly publicly once the program had ended in 1969.
Right. I completely agree with you too. What's exciting about it is that a lot of people will ask, why Blue Book? Why do we pay attention to all of these really old cases? But what I try to explain is that we haven't had an official investigation. We haven't had the sort of resources investigating this topic like we did back then. So the information that from back then is better than what we have now.
That's right. And listen, it's like, the New York Times at the end of last year, as I'm sure many of your listeners know, dropped a huge mega bomb story about the fact that there was a division inside of the Pentagon that was continuing to look into, anomalous aerial vehicles, as they are now referred to as, right? A $22 million program. And so certainly there is still the serious, in certain pockets of the government, the subject matter is taken very, very seriously, but definitely not in the way where there was an official, investigation, that was sort of like, deemed as like, okay, we're going to put this matter to rest,
Mm-hmm. Well, what's interesting about Blue Book too is, and I'm sure you ran into this, and I actually recently did a preview that I wrote up for Den of Geek that'll hopefully get out in the next couple of days or early next week. But essentially that, the idea that there was no consensus. There's this idea that the Air Force just was like, oh, this is all silly. But that's not the case at all. That there were a lot of people in the Air Force interested in the topic and believing that there was something more to it.
Absolutely. I mean, and if we go back and you look at some of these seminal UFO cases going all the way back, I mean, a lot of them were sightings and reports, reported by really highly trained personnel, whether they be military pilots, police officers, people working on military bases. These were, there's a great quote from, I think it's General Sanford, who's, when speaking about Blue Book, when he says something along the lines of, there are some relatively credible people. I'm paraphrasing it, but it's like credible reports from credible people about incredible things, you know? And that's the most fascinating thing about it is that people with trained eye, commercial airline pilots, you know, and this happens to this day. I mean, there was a huge sighting just a couple of weeks ago in Ireland where 3 commercial airline pilots witnessed something that they couldn't explain. And actually, people can go online and actually hear those audio recordings. And sort of apropos to the show, it was actually Aidan Gillen, who lives in Ireland, who plays, of course, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who informed our team at Project Blue Book about this case. So I always love that. When I was like,
cool.
Oh my God, it's a UFO case I haven't heard of, and Hynek's telling it to me, like, you know, our Hynek is telling it to us. So you know, but I mean, you know, there have been so many credible you know, amazing UFOs. So, you know, whether you go look at, you know, Chicago O'Hare in 2006, the Phoenix Lights in 1997. You know, China's Shaoxing Airport was shut down over this mysterious cylindrical craft that was seen in the sky in 2010. You know, the Chilean Navy, right, released military footage of a UFO that they couldn't understand, that they studied for 2 years in secret. About 2 years ago, that was spraying some sort of like eerie mist into the sky that people can find online. Like, it just goes on and on. So it's this fascinating mystery that persists, you know, and you know, our show just tries to take a look back at the origins of, you know, here was the first official, you know, governmental investigation into this, you know, amazing subject matter.
Now, how did you pronounce that Chinese airport?
I said Shaoxing. Is that wrong?
I don't know. You're probably right. And the reason I ask is because you were able to pronounce it. I wrote several stories on that, and I've never known how to pronounce it. So,
well, you know what's funny is at one point, this is kind of some insider baseball stuff, but when I was, you know, pitching the show and trying to get the show, you know, ordered to series, I really wanted to make sure that I communicated you know, that UFOs haven't gone away in any respect. Because sometimes I do get asked that question, like, oh gosh, you know, like, how come there were so many UFO sightings in the 1950s and 60s, but like you don't really hear about them anymore? And I'm like, that's not true. Credible UFO sightings happen all the time. The problem now is there's so much noise out there. There's so many,
right.
You know, you go on YouTube, there's a zillion fake UFO videos that people make. It's a lot harder to kind of sift through what's real and what's not real. But, you know, and so I think I had mentioned that case, and I think at one point I was like, I need to be able to correctly pronounce this airport. But I'm sure one of your listeners is going to be like, you're not even close. It's called something else. But you know, I hope the most important thing is I hope people are familiar with that case, because that was a fascinating case. There are photographs. It's this very strange kind of like what looks like it's sort of a cylindrical UFO that kind of glows and you know, really shut down an airport, which is unbelievable.
So I do want to get to address this right off the back too, because I know right off the bat, I should say, because I know this is kind of, there's been a little bit of feedback, and especially in particular from Jacques Vallée, and you know who he is, I'm sure, but people concerned about the accuracy. However, this is a historical fiction, and I guess, how did you tackle that?
Yeah, it's funny. Jacques Vallée is actually somebody we've been in recent discussions with about sort of a companion piece. I hope I can say this, and I hope I'm not like letting any cats out of the bag I'm not supposed to. I mean, listen, you know, we are a drama series. We are a dramatization. We are not the documentary on Dr. J. Allen Hynek or his life. But, you know, a couple of things I will say about the show that were very important to us. Number one, you know, as you know, we had both of his sons on as consultants for the show, because we wanted to make sure that as best we could, we depicted the man and who Dr. Allen Hynek was and his journey accurately, and who he was as a person as well. So having them on board as sort of firsthand witnesses who grew up with Project Blue Book in their household, you know what I mean, saw sort of the effect it had on their father and tracked his career, you know, all his life, that was super helpful. Obviously, the second most important thing for people to know is that every week we are looking at real life UFO cases that people can go out and search and research for themselves. Do you know what I mean? Like, that was really important to us, is that there be, and there's other aspects too. I mean, like, elements, characters that we try to incorporate that were around at the time, men like Donald Kehoe and people, folks like that we also try to incorporate into the show. But yes, we do take some dramatic liberties when we felt we sort of needed to tell the best story. It's inspired by true events. It's rooted in real life cases for sure. It's based off a real life character who worked for this program. And, but there are things like the chronology of when these cases occurred that's a little bit out of order. There are things where, hey, this was a Project Blue Book case. Hynek himself may not have been on the ground at the time, but, obviously we have to tell the story through our lead characters. So, it becomes a dance of, of trying to be authentic to the history and what's really occurred, but not always accurate. But one of the things I know history is doing to kind of separate those two, so just to make sure that there's no confusion, is that there will be a short companion piece that is essentially to learn more about the real life case that inspired this week's episode of Blue Book. Tune in, after the show. And that is actually the area in which we have been in discussions with men like Jacques Vallée to contribute their voice and their opinion, to those cases and all of that. Because we want to make sure that people do understand our agenda is never to, confuse anybody or anything like that. But our hope is to both educate and entertain, and to entertain, certain liberties have to be
right.
Taken.
Right. And I'm excited to see who they choose to do that companion piece, because I was considered, and unfortunately, at the last minute, I found out I didn't get it, and I would have been excited to do it. Although, I'm sure they chose someone great, so I'm excited to see who they got. But I will be writing follow-ups similar to this for Den of Geek every episode. But I think...
great.
That is what's important for people to know, that when you're portraying, in a historical fiction, like, you can't have the thousands of characters that were actually involved. Usually you've got a handful of characters that have to represent the different attitudes of the time.
Well, one of the challenges was, as I'm sure many of your listeners know, is that there were actually 3 different Air Force programs, right? We start with Sign and Project Sign in 48, which really was a very legitimate investigatory program that was looking into what is happening here, in which Hynek did do some, sort of review of cases and that kind of a thing, right? But really, towards the end of Sign, he gets involved. Then you have Grudge, where that was essentially just a debunking operation where Hynek's not really involved at all, and then they bring him back in for Project Blue Book. So, the show is called Project Blue Book, and so it was important to us that, it would be it was just very tricky to be like, oh, but he's already done this work before, but now he's coming back. It's just, there was no elegant way to kind of marry everything there, and sort of, so what it becomes is we sort of treat it like, okay, he's coming in fresh, although he had looked at, some of this stuff before. But what was great is, and some listeners may know this, is even in Project Blue Book, he went back and re-examined some of the classic cases from the Sign era. So we were like, okay, let's, we're trying to be as truthful as we can inside of sort of our storytelling as we can be. But yes, there's always, in any historical adaptation, there's always going to be discrepancies between sort of, the events as they really occurred and the dramatization that's necessary to hopefully hook viewers and keep them entertained while educating them at the same time.
Exactly. And, for me, that really wasn't an issue. It's kind of a UFO geek thing that I wrote about in my article coming out, and I'm glad that you bring up now, because I think the audience then can get past that before they see the show, that, Hynek is joining during the Project Blue Book era in the show. But I'm like you. It's not really, that big of a deal. You have to simplify things, and you make the show interesting. And if people want, which hopefully they'll do, they'll Google the heck out of Hynek and, find out his true history. And you're probably aware that there's a good recent biography, The Close Encounters Man by Mark O'Connell. Did you rely on that at all?
Oh, that's a wonderful book. That is an absolutely wonderful book. That book came out. It came out like I think right when the writer's room was opening up or something like that. Like no other book on him ever existed other than, of course, the books he had written, which are wonderful too. But it's a great book. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Aidan Gillen read that book as well. I think he,
cool.
that was part of his, part of his research of understanding the man and understanding the character. But it's a fantastic book, and I give hats off to Mark for writing such an in-depth report on Hynek and who he was.
Yeah, I know he's really excited. In fact, I had a podcast with him just a few months ago where we addressed the show specifically, and he hadn't heard anything, but he was curious, and he'll be super excited to hear, especially that Aidan Gillen had read it.
Oh, good. Yeah, no, I mean, I think different people are tapping into the idea that, wow, what an incredible guy. And forgive me that there's a loud garbage truck outside. I hope listeners aren't hearing this outside my house, of course.
It's your side job. You also do garbage pickup.
On the weekends, on the weekends, I have another gig.
So,
but, I mean, I think he saw, as I did, that there's just an incredible story here. And you hit it on the head, Alejandro, in terms of like what we want to do is, what I really hope happens is viewers check out the show, they're entertained, they get wrapped up with the characters, wrapped up with these kind of intriguing cases, the mystery of the show, and then yes, please go and research and look up these cases and do your due diligence and start to really learn about just like, wow, like there were so many fascinating cases. And we do our best to bring them to light and to dramatize them. But I would love nothing more than that this continues to like open up the conversation and educate people on Blue Book, on how it operated. We had the chance to one of the great kind of other first hand witnesses that I got a chance to sit down with is the last living director of Project Blue Book, who is still alive. His name is Lieutenant Colonel Robert Friend. He was a Tuskegee Airman, worked on Project Blue Book, worked with Hynek. And I got a chance to sit down and interview him for about 2 hours at the history offices when we were developing the project. And what a gem of information he was. He's got to be 96 or something in terms of just how Blue Book operated, what it looked like, how cases came in, the different ways cases came in, how they interacted with the media, et cetera, et cetera. So, we do our. I mean, it's history, and they want us to be, as accurate and authentic as we can be, but they also know that this is scripted and they want to make sure we tell a great story as well. So it's always a marriage of the two.
And they've been doing a great job. I've loved these articles that they've been putting out.
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. Oh, like on their history website about, hey, learn about this case. Absolutely. And that's sort of like another, really, I think, creative and smart way that they're trying to just make sure that people understand, like, this is all true events. These are all real life reports that we're talking about here. If it's the Gorman incident, if it's the Flatwoods Monster case, if it's the Lubbock Lights, I mean, these are all things that really occurred. And that were, never, even if explained, never explained satisfactorily to the witnesses on the ground and in the sky who saw things with their own eyes that they couldn't explain. So, that's the crazy thing about Blue Book is like, 12,000 cases, over 700, which remain unsolved. But then even within the ones that are solved, for some hardcore UFO historians, I'm sure they'll know like that the CIA, with the Robertson panel, they came in and they would change things from kind of, possibly birds to probably birds and things of that nature. Where like, and Hynek himself was a man who would be the first to kind of say that like Blue Book, while sort of public to the public was an investigatory arm, really kind of internally there was immense pressure to just be a debunking and kind of like closing case division. Because, it was all about kind of, calming the public and sort of controlling the narrative on what people were seeing and basically, trying to publicly be like, hey, there's nothing to see here.
Well, and that's one of the things, I think I mentioned this before, just so it's clear, and why I have a little more insight, is I did get to see a preview, and you do get the sense, which I feel is accurate, and like you just mentioned, that it doesn't seem, and Hynek made this criticism himself, that the primary objective, at least what Project Blue Book was sharing with the public, or at least with the Air Force leadership, I should say, was sharing with the public, was to truly inform them about real investigations into UFOs.
Yes. Like, so you're saying that, like, yeah, there was a difference between sort of what the public was aware that they were doing in terms of what Project Blue Book was, and what privately kind of inside what it felt like to work there in terms of it being
right,
to close cases. Yeah, no, 100%. And that's something that, listen, I mean, that's from a thematic level, that is sort of something we are hoping resonates today. I mean, unfortunately, we do live, regardless of which political side you're on. I think we can all agree that there are aspects of fake news out there. There is spin out there. There is alternative facts out there, and all that kind of stuff. Ways in which the public is being we're those in position of power trying to control the narrative on various issues, and that goes all the way back. I mean, Blue Book very much was that as well. Blue Book's like had the agenda just as much of sort of figuring out what's going on here as sort of also simultaneously making light of the subject, kind of explaining them away as quickly and as quietly as they could.
Mm-hmm.
If a UFO case didn't make the newspapers, Project Blue Book would not report it to the newspapers. And if it did make the newspapers, that's when they really had to come in, and the pressure would come down. Like, you got to tell them something. You got to give them something. Tell them it's a weather balloon. Tell them it's birds. Tell them it's a meteor.
Yeah.
So, and Hynek is one of the first to admit that. I mean, if for those who know Hynek and his stuff well, it's fascinating that not only was he convinced coming out of Blue Book that UFOs are worthy of scientific study, and most likely some, I mean, he has got a great quote where I'm paraphrasing it, but it's essentially like he believes that, that by understanding the mystery of UFOs, he thinks it could be a key piece in understanding, who we are and what our place in the cosmos is. So, he was big on that. But then he was also big on the notion that, 100%, Project Blue Book was in many ways a disinformation campaign used to control public perception about this, about what's going on here.
Right. I mean, I feel kind of like a PR spin type of stuff, a lot of it going on, especially if you read, the guy who was the first chief of Blue Book, Ruppelt's book, they didn't really care about his real research.
Flying objects in 1956. That, by the way, that was a seminal book for us. Just another great book, and something your listeners should just be aware of too, right? And I'm sure maybe some of them know is the first. Not only was the chief scientific advisor of Project Blue Book, Alan Hynek, did he come out, switching sides, right, on the UFO issue. So did Ed Ruppelt, Captain Ed Ruppelt. That book is filled with sort of criticism of Blue Book and filled with cases and events and things that he couldn't explain either. And the feeling that people aren't taking this seriously, or there's pressure to kind of quell what's going on here, so.
Right, exactly.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. I'm glad you get so excited about that book, because I do too. I really feel that is the most important book in this field, actually.
Yeah, that book is one of my prized possessions because, okay, it's a book written by the first director of Project Blue Book. I had Lieutenant Colonel Robert Friend, who's the last living director of Project Blue Book, sign the book. And then inside of that book is all my notes for the show Project. So it sits on my shelf sort of as just I just feel so fortunate and blessed to actually be able to be a part, a small part of that.
Well, hopefully,
incredible endeavor.
I've got to cut you off because we got to go to break here, but hopefully it'll be a bigger part of the whole story as time goes on, and we'll talk more about that after the break. But we've got to take a quick break. For those of you listening to the podcast, you'll hear a short musical interlude, and then we will be right back with David O'Leary. Are back. You're listening to Open Mind UFO Radio. I'm your host, Alejandro Rojas, and we have producer, show creator, writer of Project Blue Book, David O'Leary. Hello again.
Hi.
So, kind of playing off of where we ended, you said you feel so, honored to be part of this conversation and bringing this information out to people. I'm kind of hopeful that your show makes Hynek a bit of a cult hero, and one of the reasons I think this may happen is because Aidan Gillen plays such a... You really love this guy. I think you love the Hynek that he plays on the show.
Absolutely. Aidan Gillen is, such a wonderful actor and such a chameleon of an actor, too. He's one of those guys who is able to vanish into every role he does, right? Like, his performance of Alan Hynek is nothing like his performance of, like, Littlefinger on Game of Thrones, which is nothing like his performance on The Wire. He's just so multi-versatile. When we were casting Hynek, it's we want to do the exact same thing in terms of making him somebody that just people really understand how important of a historical figure he was. For us, he needed to satisfy a few things. You really needed to believe that he was sort of the smartest guy in the room, for lack of a better term, because that's who Hynek is and was. If you go back and look at his books, this man was such a meticulous, detail-oriented scientist. But he's got to be the smartest guy in the room. But he was also accessible, right? He kept an open mind and was a personable guy and lovable too, right? A family man and somebody who who's a little quirky and a little nerdy in his own respects. You know what I mean? And that's what we try to do with our character. You know what I mean? He's smart. He's open-minded. But he's a scientist first and foremost. He's driven by where the science goes. And he's also kind of, and that's why I love how we've partnered him with Michael Malarkey, who is like smooth as can be and this young kind of hotshot, Air Force captain. And it becomes a bit of this wonderful odd couple, the two of them working together, which, and listen, the first, Ed Ruppelt really was a young guy. Ed Ruppelt died at the age of 37. And when he was working on Project Blue Book, he was, in his early 30s at best, and was this very kind of, charismatic, World War II vet. So
it's funny you mention that because now that you mention it, I do kind of see the Ruppelt in the character in the show because Hynek, of course, was a scientist, whereas Ruppelt was kind of like, he didn't know what to make of this stuff. His boss told him, go look into what they've been doing at this UFO project. He's like, well, it's kind of interesting. I think there's something to at least look into. And he started running across these cases where he's scratching his head. I don't know what the hell's going on here. And I think we have that with the Hynek character, and that's why I'm hoping he becomes kind of a cult hero, because I think the audience wants to believe, but they want a reason to believe. And so I think they'll identify with this character who's skeptic, but then he's finding, whoa, there's a lot of weird stuff here.
100%. Hynek was he has such a trained eye, you know what I mean? So the fact that there were so many cases that he was like, I don't have the astronomical answer for this. I really don't. Really, I do think says a lot, and then, keep it. And what's also fascinating about his journey too is Hynek was the father of ufology. You know what I mean? He is the first one. He was the first scientist to really, be like, try to categorize and try to, put into some sort of, understandable language, this mysterious phenomena that was happening. And, of course, like, he is the creator of the Close Encounters classification system that we're also familiar. Close Encounters of the First Kind, Second Kind, Third Kind, right? He was, obviously a consultant on Spielberg's movie. He's got a wonderful cameo, by the way, if anyone's ever curious to see. He's got a cameo in the film near the end. And but he did so much more than just that classification system. He would categorize different UFO sightings into patterns, daylight discs and different. He had a grid of like the different kinds of shapes that UFOs would be reported to take. The different kinds of, he looked for patterns in how people report UFO cases. Things like, there's a lot of, most people who have a UFO experience, there's always that thought process of, at first I thought it was X. You know what I mean? And then, so like things like that are just the nature of human psychology. So there's just immense insights into his body of work. The UFO Experience was the book that really got me hooked on his story. And then, and there was a wonderful documentary, by the way, about America's history with UFOs that was really sort of seminal for me too, which was Peter Jennings' 2005 Seeing is Believing, which I encourage everybody to check that out. It's got a great section on Hynek and really goes back to the beginning of America's history with UFOs as well. It's a wonderful thing.
Oh, I had a couple talks in Baltimore, and actually Paul Hynek got to sit in one, but one was Spielberg, and of course Hynek was a big part of that one.
Yep.
It would have been so fun if you would have seen it, because you geek out about the same things that I do, and so that's exciting. Obviously, you're kind of a UFO geek like the rest of us here listening to the show. This topic excites you. So probably, because I'm sure a lot of people, even like myself, have thought they should make a show about Blue Book. How did you sell it? And it seems like this was a big sale for you.
It was. It definitely was. So my background was I started off like working in Hollywood as like an assistant, and I actually became an executive where I would work with writers, and then realized I really wanted to be a writer. But I was working primarily in movies, and when and literally what happened for me was I really wanted to break into television because there's so many great stories that happen in TV. And literally one night with my wife, kind of having a glass of wine, I started we just were talking about like, well, what could you write? And this idea kind of came to fruition. I was like, that could be a really interesting series. Like, for lack of a better term, I hate to deduce the show to its like bare essence, but like, a real life X-Files set in the time of Mad Men was sort of like, I still have the napkin that I scribbled this idea down on. And I was like, there's something there. And what I did was I actually spec'd the pilot, which means that I actually wrote the pilot without anybody paying me to write it. I just did a ton of research. I worked with my reps at the time, and I wrote the pilot, and I sold it that way. Most television actually gets sold on pitch, but because I didn't have any kind of previous real clout in television, I had worked more in the movie space, and they are sort of considered still two different things out here. I just got very, very fortunate that we were able to kind of put a team together. It got a lot of reads around town. A lot of people liked it. It got a ton of meetings. And then I got the call that everybody wants, which is like, hey, Bob Zemeckis' company loves this, wants to do this. And right around that same time, too, my agent had a lunch with an executive at A&E, which is our studio that creates a lot of television programming for history. And they were looking for something in the 1950s, but they didn't know what. And so it all just kind of came together. And I was fortunate that they were that they both purchased the script. And I had put together a Bible for the show, which for the non-screenwriters out there is essentially just like, here's a roadmap for like where I see this going over multiple seasons, because in an ideal world, we try to be, we take some liberties with the chronology, but we really try to be truthful as well. And that, I would say in our first season, our cases that we look at really take place between the years of about 1948 to 1953. And the timeline on our show is more like fall of 1951 to summer of 1952. So we try to be truthful because there's just so many great cases. How do you limit yourself? So we tried to we're like, all right, well, let's let history limit us in some ways so that we'll have, because there's just so many more great stories to tell down the line,
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, it's exciting, and I'm glad that they saw this, the potential, because it is this rich, hidden U.S. history that really hasn't been brought to a higher platform, and they're really tackling it and bringing it there with their articles and then with the show, and that's just so exciting because there's so much there that it's wonderful to see kind of this hidden history be brought out to the greater public.
Yeah, and I that's where I really give my hats off to history and my hats off to A&E Studios. They loved this project from the beginning. They just something for the fans and viewers of the show to know. The network and studio executives are as sort of obsessed with this subject matter as anybody. I went to a Bob Lazar documentary with my network executive that he informed me about. You know what I mean? They are not just this is a subject matter.
That's hilarious. I was just hanging out with those guys the other day who made that documentary.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I could do a whole thing just on Bob Lazar. I mean, it's a fascinating, no matter where you fall on whether you believe him or not, I think it's a fascinating story. So that's what's been so, I feel so lucky to be working with people that truly understand the show. And then we're really willing to put the resources behind it to make it, for me, it looks highly, the show has a very cinematic feel. We got some of the best directors, television directors that are out there. We, our cast, between Aidan Gillen, Michael Malarkey, we got Neil McDonough, Michael Harney. Neil McDonough, is one of the great actors, and so is Michael Harney. Laura Minnell and Ksenia Solo. I mean, these are just wonderful, wonderful people and just incredible actors that I'm just like, wow, I can't believe that they've come on board to help us tell this story.
Mm-hmm. Now, you believe there's a true mystery behind the UFO phenomena. Is that correct?
100%. 100%. I actually think where I fall is similar to where Hynek fell, in that I oscillate in what I truly believe UFOs might be. And I'm sure that and I hope that people know this, that Hynek did as well. The extraterrestrial hypothesis is one of Hynek's hypotheses. But he also thought it was just as likely that we may be dealing with some sort of hyperdimensional or interdimensional intelligence that we have yet to understand, whereby, and that came from just the fact that so many UFO reports have this sort of blinking out of existence property to them. They almost shift into a higher state of existence, where somehow our planet is theirs as well, but we don't fully understand that yet. Mm-hmm. Hynek postulated that potentially we could be dealing with an extraterrestrial artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. Just wrap your head around that for a second. And then, of course, is the notion that potentially, are we being visited by our future selves? Do UFOs represent the reality of time travel? And I think all of those are potential answers to what we're dealing with. But what I do believe is two things. I believe that there is a genuine, unexplained, intelligent phenomena in our skies that we have yet to understand. And I also believe that 100% certain pockets of our governments and of other governments around the world know that to be true. And due to kind of fear of what that might mean and what that might do to our public, have sort of systematically decided to try to keep that fact in the dark as best they can, while they themselves try to realize what is the nature of what we're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I get asked all the time is, wait, come on, the government is horrible at keeping secrets. You know what I mean? How could they ever possibly keep a secret this big, right? To which I always say, precisely, they've done a horrible job at keeping this secret. That is why half this country believes that, we're not being told the whole truth. You know what I mean? That's why cases and reports leak all the time, because it at least seems to me that the UFO phenomena doesn't necessarily, prescribe to what maybe our government might want it to be, which is to remain on the fringes and to remain something that's sort of secretive. Right. No, that's why 10,000 people in Phoenix in 1997 saw a mile-long V-shaped craft in the sky that they have yet to understand. That's why, 24 people at Chicago O'Hare's airport saw a disc hovering over the airport that then shot up into the sky and left this like creepy circular indentation in the cloud. I mean, it's just so it's.
And to your point about the government, we recently found out they did have a secret UFO program.
Correct, and that's only the one we know about. That's
right.
The one that the New York Times was able to realize. Wait a second, $22 million a year of taxpayer money is looking into anomalous aerial vehicles, and there's this wonderful. I don't know what you want to call it, like sort of private division called To the Stars Academy that maybe some people have heard of.
Oh yeah, we talk about it a lot on this show.
Right? And so they're coming out with all these incredible videos, that have been authenticated and that are real, that are recent, and it's great to see that that's happening and that in this modern era, I mean, it's harder, I think, to keep information secret, and I hope that people are more willing to kind of share their experiences, because that's an important piece too. I think that this is a subject matter that still gets sort of ridiculed at times. It still can be sort of difficult for people to come forward with their experiences. And, we were talking about a little bit with, we've been going to places like Alien Con and Comic-Con with the show. And one of the fascinating things I've noticed is when people come up and ask questions about the show, they also feel the need to share their own experiences. Like we had somebody at Alien Con at our most recent panel in Baltimore come up and basically be like, I've never told anybody about this who knows me, but I guess I'll tell all of you. And there were about 2,000 people in that audience. And so it's great that people are starting, if our show can also be a little bit of just helping people feel okay with, sharing what's happened to them, great, because that's all the answers lie within that, whatever those answers may be.
Well, your perspective will be very accepted by this audience because it's very similar to my perspective. That's why I love Hynek so much. And I would say that definitely this show is less about believing and more about curiosity. And discovery, looking for information. But I do want to ask, so given what you just said, was it odd for you? Because I've interviewed Friend as well, and I want to know what your experience is, because I love the guy. He's a great guy, really nice. You can't help but love the guy. However, despite running Blue Book for a period of time, he is not sold that there's a genuine mystery to the UFO phenomenon.
That is true. He, I think, remains on the more skeptical side, and although I asked him a few hard questions. I asked him the question of if Project Blue Book and if you, good sir, had come across something that you couldn't explain and that Project Blue Book couldn't explain and that you felt may represent some sort of alien or an otherworldly intelligence, would you tell me about it then? Would you have told us about it then, and would you tell us about it now? And he said, no, I would not. Right? So I was like,
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Great question.
I tried, and also some interesting things about him too, our show deals in some manner with the Majestic 12, and I know there's probably people who fall on both sides of the issue
I've got a great video on it.
On sort of the veracity of those documents, the veracity of and for those who aren't familiar with it, right? This was an alleged, sort of secret group of 12 kind of, top military personnel, scientists, etc. That was assembled by President Truman to sort of deal with the UFO problem. I asked him about that, and he was very open to that. He was like, yes, I had heard rumblings that there was this group at the time. You know what I mean? So I was like, oh, that's interesting. So it was like a couple of nuggets really did come out of my time with him that made me, but listen, he also, I'll be the first to say that he also wasn't convinced that UFOs necessarily, represent something that we have yet to understand, Mm-hmm. And one thing I'll say too, just about having an open mind and about this podcast is I think I want to make sure that audiences understand that our show toes that line as well, and that things are not always what they appear. Even in some of our marketing, even in some of the more controversial, or maybe kind of, aspects of the show, such as there's an iconic photo right now, that publicity uses of Hynek basically looking at what looks to be an alien being inside of a tank. And I just want to make sure that audiences know that we are always threading, even on aspects like that. We're always walking that line of otherworldly explanations and then also very worldly explanations. Cool. And we spent a lot of time looking at, we delve into UFOs. We also delve into other programs that were going on at the time, governmental programs happening at the time, aspects of the space race that were going on at the time. So it becomes this great blend of, I hope giving people the UFO show that they want and also hopefully the UFO show that they don't expect.
Interesting, because X-Files was like that. You would see a teaser or a trailer and you think, oh my gosh, this crazy thing's going to happen. And they'd flip it on you and it might not be what you think it is type of thing, which is exciting and more truer to real life. Real life is much more enigmatic and not straightforward.
Because it would please me nothing more that both people who are, who have either are believers or truly open-minded people on UFOs check out the show and learn more about the history if they don't already know it themselves. But then also that please, skeptics and people who are just like, this is all nonsense. Check out the show as well, and please do the research of looking at did that case couldn't have really happened, and then you go back and you look it up and you're like, no, it absolutely 100% did.
Yeah.
Just like there was a mysterious V-shaped craft over Phoenix in 97, there was a mysterious V-shaped craft over Lubbock, Texas in 1951. And there are patterns to this phenomena, and there are reality.
Cool stuff. I would love to share some stories with you about Hynek related with V-Shape too. But we'll do that. Yeah. We're running out of time. But the one thing I do want to address is you do allude to, at least in the show, some pretty conspiratorial stuff. Like you said, the image of him almost looking like an alien. And those conspiracy people are going to say, and of course it's already out there and you've probably seen it, and I'd love to hear your response, that you're part of the conspiracy, that this has to be, in cahoots with the government and you're working with them to release information.
I've heard two different versions of this. One, and listen, I actually think I would be kind of wondering this also if I wasn't on the show. Let me just preface it with that because I'm always a little bit of I wonder, what is this possible? So I've heard two different versions. I've heard the version where is the show further disinformation to hide the truth from the public? To which I will say, no, it is not. That in fact, our intent is the exact opposite. It hopes to entertain, but to educate, and we want all viewers to go do the research after the show and pick apart oh my God, that really did occur, and okay, that they're obviously dramatizing, and I get why, and things like that. So we are not trying to be a smokescreen in any way. And then the second thing I've heard is sort of the flip of that, which is, is the show in some way preparation for disclosure? To which all I will say is that if it is, it definitely goes above my pay grade. If whoever, you know what I mean? If the heads of the network who then work for the heads of these multimedia conglomerates, but listen, I mean, I'm having fun with it here, but the answer to that question is also no. I mean, we really we are our own thing. We just wanted, for me, I just wanted to tell this incredible story as truthfully as I can, as authentically as I can, and also as entertainingly as I can. And that's what we've sort of set out to do. And but these sort of larger machinations at work, I mean, they are fascinating, and they are fascinating theories. But certainly, all I can say is, as far as I am aware, as truthfully as I can answer, is no. We are just a television show on history, trying to tell a great story.
Yeah, well, your answer is very similar to other people who are very fascinated and interested in this field who also work in Hollywood or television and stuff like that. In fact, your show reminds me a bit of Dark Skies. Did you ever see that series from the 90s?
Yes, I have. And what's so funny is I was doing a different podcast and somebody actually introduced me to Bryce Zabel. And I'm going to grab lunch with Bryce Zabel, which is awesome because we both sort of share the now experience of having worked on a UFO show that was set in a period timetable.
You'll have a great time. He's a good friend, and in fact, as soon as I saw the preview of the show, I emailed him and I said, "Did you get a chance to go to one of the previews?" And he said, "Why is it? Did it remind you of Dark Skies?" And I said, "Exactly." And he said, "Oh, tell me more about it."
It's unbelievable, and it's not. And it's funny because Dark Says. I remember when it came out, and it was in the '90s, and I was probably 14 or 15 when it came out. I've only seen a little bit of it, to be honest with you, but like it's a show that I definitely like. I feel like I should now especially after I meet with Bryce, binge, you know what I mean? But this show really just sort of, for me, came out of just more of like the real life, not that Dark Skies, I'm sure, touched upon this too, but came off of just all the research and sort of books that I read and documentaries that I watched. That's what sort of like got my juices flowing is, we wanted to keep it, and this was so important to Bob Zemeckis as well, is like, we have to keep it grounded. We have to keep it feeling real. We have to feel, it has to honor what Blue Book was, and honor as best we can, what we know to be true. And then of course, but listen, it's like with Blue Book files, files are redacted, things are changed. Even in the declassification of Blue Book files, there are files where it's just a photograph and virtually nothing else, or redacted information. Right. So it gives us some liberty to we're also telling the untold story, the story of things that the public may not be aware of, Mm-hmm. And we're, having fun with that.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I greatly enjoyed the preview that I got to see, and I'm so excited for the show. And this talking with you has been more exciting than I thought and I thought it would be good, but this has been great.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks so much. And thanks all the listeners out there for listening. And I really hope you enjoy the show. And, you can find me on social media and all that good stuff. And if you enjoy it, please tell your friends about it and spread the word. We're a first year show in a highly competitive peak TV marketplace. So I appreciate, the love and support, as best as you can. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much to David O'Leary for joining us on the show. He was so much fun, huh? All that energy and excitement. And really, he, as we heard, is the one to thank for getting this information out there. And I think that, personally, he does deserve thanks for getting that information out there. Because the end game for those of us really interested in this topic is that a lot of serious information about this topic is going to get out there. People are going to be, inspired to look at the real information, look up the real Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the real Blue Book cases. I think that it's by far a net positive. I mean, if there are some weird people out there who want to believe the fiction, then what can you do about that? But I think that people are savvy enough when they're watching TV to know that fiction is just that, fiction. And not everybody, unfortunately. But those who are interested in the real history will then look it up, which is very, very exciting. At the very least, people will be left with the concept that, the Air Force found much more mysterious information and credibility to the topic of UFOs than people have been led to believe over the many decades that the Air Force has kind of been poo-pooing this topic. So I think that's really important. I'm very excited for the series. And I'm very excited for the way that the History Channel has been marketing this series. So, and I'm excited for someone like David O'Leary to be getting out there. And, as I often mention when these people come out, is that we have a growing field. We have more and more people interested in this topic seriously and passionately, and especially people who have access to be able to get information in front of the masses. That's always very, very important. This is also very positive, including the news that Martin and I were talking about at the beginning of the show that you can find at openminds.tv. So, Project Blue Book begins January 8th. Go to the History Channel and look up Project Blue Book, and you'll be able to read all of these cool articles that I've been talking about. And, of course, you could go to openminds.tv and also find links to this in the show notes. I'll have links and I'll have more information as well. So check all of that out. Otherwise, I want to say, Karen and I had our show last week about all of the cool products at the UFO Congress store. Remember, check that out. Time is of the essence as Christmas comes up, but we get stuff out pretty quickly, and we have lots of really cool stuff. The store's been keeping me so busy because there's lots of really cool products there that Karen has been able to find that people are loving, which is wonderful. So check out store.ufocongress.com and check out our YouTube pages, mine, because I've been doing that UFOs Live, where I talk about UFO news of the week every Thursday, and then the UFO Congress, where we've been posting more information as well. So thank you all so much for being here. I want to thank Martin Willis for the beginning of the show, doing the news with us. Martin Willis of Podcast UFO. I want to thank Caleb Hanks for the opening and close music. And by the way, check out Caleb Hanks on Patreon. He's got some new music that he has put out. And I do often get the question, who does your opening and close music? It's Caleb Hanks. Go check out his Patreon because you can get some more music for free there. And then I also want to thank Systematics for the bumper music. And of course, as usual, I want to thank you all, the listeners. Until next time, when we're going to be talking to Paul Hynek, Dr. J. Allen Hynek's son. This is going to be a really special one as well. But until then, you guys have a great week. Adios, muchachos.